Hello, everybody. Welcome to Subtle Asian Book Club. We are a book club dedicated to amplifying Asian authors. I am Alexandra, one of the co-hosts, and I'm here with Tiffany, who's also my co-host. And we're here with two amazing authors who are the authors of This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is also our July book of the month. So can you guys please introduce yourselves and your books? And as a quick icebreaker, what was your favorite book so far this year?
Max, I nominate you. Haha.
Oh, man. Okay, so
Tag.
hi, I'm Max Gladstone. I am the co-author of This Is How You Lose the Time War with Amal, who is over there the way that I see her, but I don't know how you guys are seeing her. So we'll see. And I've also written many other books, which are over this hand, including the craft sequence of novels, starting with Three Parts Dead, which are sort of urban fantasy, sort of necromancer, bankruptcy lawyer procedurals, and a big scary road trip novel called This Is How You called Last Exit, and a vaguely sort of journey to the westy outer space hyperspace opera romp called Empress of Forever. So a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. This Is How You Lose the Time War is, well, let's since it's God, I just have this instinct that it's all mirrored now. Amal, why don't you introduce yourself and then we can talk about the book?
Sure. My name's Amal El-Mohtar, and I'm a writer. I write short stories and poetry and criticism and increasingly longer fiction. But anyway, I write the otherworldly science fiction fantasy column for the New York Times book review, and I wrote half of Time War. Yes, and then I don't know. So I wrote half of Time War. Max wrote the other half of Time War. Favorite book of this year?
Oh, I forgot that question altogether. This is good. This gives me time to think.
Yes, good. My favorite books so far this year. This is very difficult because I had like 2 back-to-back columns come out, which were just like wall-to-wall raves. But the first one that popped into my head is the one I'm going to stick with, which is also the one with the hardest to remember title. But it's Ink, Blood, Sister, Scribe. That's the one. Yes. By author whose name I have forgotten, but sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm on the spot. Ink, Blood, Sister, Scribe, phenomenal book about sisters, family, relationships, and also magical bookbinding. Just absolutely gorgeous stuff. I was really blown away by it, and it's one of those like infuriating books that's a debut and just so good that you're like, how can you get better? Like, you started at a 10. It's not okay.
She was. I read an interview with her in Locus. She's been in like, she's been writing short stories for a while. Like, did an MFA and was like shopping a literary novel for a bunch of times. So there's like a lot of shoe leather.
Sure.
In that book.
Emma, and I apologize if I am mispronouncing.
O with an umlaut R S Z.
I think.
Yeah.
Emma Turs. So yeah, anyway, she also has no social media presence, which I find like I want to praise. Like, her, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Sophia Samatar have logged off. Just incredible. Just awe-inspiring. Oh, my light's gone. I said that and like the social media gods decided to like cloud gather around me. How about you, Max? What's your favorite book so far this year?
Oh gosh.
That's already out, preferably, I guess, because one thing is we get to read books before they come out a lot, and sometimes that muddles our schedule.
That is true. Let's see. Nothing that's released this year is jumping to mind. The 2 things that are occurring are both Thistlefoot by Gemma Rose Nethercott came out last year and is great. This sort of very poetically sort of embedded connection between a bunch of Jewish diaspora feelings and like big American kind of Western vibes in a way that really worked for me. And it has this great sort of dollying in and dollying out question of scope, where it'll go from sort of fun YA adventure with like kooky characters to all of a sudden saying something that's like very profound about, I don't know, America or a certain subset of American experience. Really liked that. And so I'll stick with that.
Yay! Thank you for sharing. I'm so excited to add both of those onto my TBR. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, you're muted, Tiffany, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't hear you.
No, sorry.
Okay, I tried to put in headphones to hopefully make things easier, but now it's just computers rebelling. That's kind of what I was today.
Exactly.
But jumping into our first question, while both of you are incredibly successful authors on your own, the collaboration of This Is How You Lose a Time War has left its own legacy in the sci-fi fantasy community. And we're super curious to know how this collaborative process came to be. What inspired you guys to write this story, and how did you go about bringing it to life?
Yeah, this story was like, it really came out of the fact that Max and I wanted to write something together. We were becoming friends in a sort of secret way. In fact, we were writing each other physical letters by hand. In fact, because I recently moved, I have a whole bunch of them quite nearby because I haven't set up my office yet. But yeah, we would write each other letters by hand as we were getting to know each other. We had met at a con and really hit it off and just wanted to keep a conversation going. And so we kept writing each other these letters by hand. And then one day while Max was on tour, I'm narrating your story here, Max, but one day while Max was on tour, he was writing me letters from different stops on the tour, but I couldn't write back because he was on the move. So I was getting all of these letters and not able to reply to them. I was assembling them and making a master reply letter for him to get once he was home. But in the meantime, he was reading a bunch of my short stories that he'd taken with him in a printed folder and stuff on tour. And texted me, which is a very unusual way for us to communicate at the time, to say, hey, you know what? We should write something together. And I was like, yes, I've been waiting for you to say this. I was hoping you'd say that because I loved Max's work, but there's sort of a big lift difference in terms of, writing collaborations with other short story writers on a short story scale versus collaborations with someone who is a novelist many times over, has many more novels to write. The workflow is just very different. So it would have felt presumptuous for me to say, we should write something together. And a book is kind of a big ask. But so we sort of settled on...
It didn't feel this way, to me at the time, but, yes.
Yeah, I didn't say any of this to you at the time. This is wow, revelation.
The truth comes out.
Truth comes out. But yeah, we decided that, I was also working on a PhD at the time. And so we were what does our schedule allow? And we figured that maybe half a novella each, we could maybe figure that out. We were absolutely thinking in terms of just the mechanical, physical requirements of our time and what we could get down on a page. Before we were talking about ideas or story or anything like that. So, and we figured too that because we had two very different writing styles, that something that had two voices in it that could use our respective writing styles, and rather than try to sound the same or have one voice in the book, might be good. So eventually that led to us going, what if people were writing each other letters? We have some experience with that. And it's sort of, so that was one part of it. I'm tossing the ball over to you, Max, now.
Sure. Now I'm wondering what part of the ball you want to...
I am not, yeah, we don't have anything rehearsed, incidentally. We just have told this story a bunch of times, and it's a little different every time we do. So.
I go back and think, in a very Time War sort of way, what are the preconditions, in addition to the fact that we both love each other's writing, and that we really were our very close friends and wanted to use writing to manifest that in some way. I wonder whether the project would have taken a similar form if we were both writers who were more embedded in the, MFA literary tradition, where there is a much less robust tradition, at least that I'm aware of, co-writing. One thing that stands out about Time War for me is, while I think it's very possible, easy to read without having a lot of genre, education feels like a
literacy.
Yeah, genre literacy, genre experience. It plays into and uses tools that have been developed in science fiction over decades to quickly establish the character of place, the kind of dramatic situation that we're in, whether the cyberpunkiness of it all, or now we're in a big space opera moment. That's often something you can tell reading a science fiction story from the second or third line, let alone paragraph. And that's a tool set that we run with a lot in Time War. Also, the sort of edit war interplayed sort of framework felt very science fictional. And there's a robust tradition in science fiction and fantasy of co-writing duos, whether, in the wake of the Good Omens series, probably Gaiman and Pratchett are real standouts, but you've also got Steve Bruce and Emma Bull working on Born Freedom and Necessity, I think is the name of it.
Yeah.
And Ellen Kushner and Delia Sherman, and
I think you've got most recently too, like Cassandra Khaw and Richard Kadri.
Yes, that's right. I haven't read that one yet.
I haven't either. I just see it and I'm like, this sounds very cool. But
yeah, exactly. And the massive shelves of Andre Norton and Mercedes Lackey paperbacks from my childhood. So it's something that's done. That was very cool, and maybe made the project easier to talk about, pitch, sell. I'm just guessing. But so once we had all this sort of background, we basically found a way to be sitting across the table from one another in a gazebo in somebody's backyard for a couple of weeks. We'd wake up, make some coffee, go out, sit down, and just write across the table from one another. One of us would write the scene in which a letter was about to be received, and the other one would write the letter. And without having really agreed to do this beforehand, we discussed the form and manner of the letter, how it would be received, where it would be read. But we didn't talk too much about the interiority of our characters, or of red or blue, and we certainly didn't discuss the contents of the letter. Maybe once or twice in the particularly plotty Act 3-4 transition. But for the most part, that was as much of a surprise to us as readers as it was to the characters when they were discovering and opening the letters.
Yeah.
I think idea-wise too, we were drawing on we sort of started thinking of, once we had two people writing each other letters, the rest of the time travel stuff kind of grew out of the fact that we always recognized when we wrote each other letters that there's a kind of time travel in letters, that because of the time delay of the post, whatever you're writing in the letter is going to be old news by the time someone receives it. But also you kind of have to imagine that person in the future receiving your letter. So if I knew that it was going to be a while before Max was home, for instance, I might write something in the letter like, "You'll probably be home by now." And I'm sort of imagining what kinds of, adventures you've had between the last leg of your tour and getting home. Or, by the time this reaches you, X, Y, and Z will have happened. And I don't know how that will have affected you, but, I'm thinking of you, and that sort of thing. So it was I'm writing to a future Max, and Max is receiving a letter from past Amal. But what if two people could travel across time and space constantly and had accessible to them all of the material of time and space? Then you could eliminate that and always be writing to each other in a kind of immediacy, until, we play with it a little bit in in the story itself, and that kind of stops at a certain point. But
they're also separated. Like, even though they have that flexibility and freedom, they're separated by these profound social barriers. They're like enemies and at war, and they can't be discovered talking to one another, which creates a little bit more distance. It really, this creation of the other as audience feels very special to letter writing.
Yeah.
To me.
You are sort of inventing each other as you're writing to each other.
And you revise the picture, right? But there's this creative act of imagining the other from what you know of them, from what you've read, from their voice and their letter. That is very powerful, and I don't know, and intimate is a weird word to use, but you invite them inside so much.
Mm-hmm.
I find that anyway in real-time communication, even text communication, you know, it can start to feel a little bit more like, I don't know, scientific observation or inquiry. You know, what are you thinking right now? You just ask them, and then they'll tell you. But the barrier to doing that is so low that there's often this other step that gets missed of imagining what they might be thinking in response. You know, of course, if they then like leave you on red for a while, then you start imagining it. But maybe in a less healthy way. Yeah, right. The delete.
Wow. Well, but thank you for sharing all of that. I have so many questions. But one that like came to mind specifically based on like everything that you said was that like from what you said, it sounds like it started off with the letters and then kind of like the fantasy element. And so I was wondering, did the time travel kind of come from the concept of like what you literally just said about letters, about like waiting and like how like I'm speaking to like a future person and like they're going to be reading like a past person? Like, do you think like that type of format of the letter contributed to like building the world of the fantasy?
Yeah, I think we were definitely like, once we had time travel as like a concept, because we are both writers in science fiction and fantasy, there are also like a whole bunch of ways of doing time travel that are really different from each other, right? So we kind of had to decide for ourselves, okay, we know we want to do time travel, but what kind of time travel do we want to do? Do we want to do time travel where there's a multiverse, for instance, where like you can go from like multiple versions of different realities? Or do we want the kind of time travel where you can't, like, everything has already happened and you're just kind of moving around in an already completely determined like bubble of reality and stuff? And we definitely like chose the former. We chose like a multiverse thing, but we do have elements of the latter, of like a kind of self-fulfilled prophecy element going through it too. But the like there, once we knew we wanted contrasting voices. Sorry, what?
It's like a closed loop within meta time.
Yeah, closed loop within meta time. Very simple. Rolls off the. It actually does roll off the tongue. Closed loop meta time. Anyway,
did you read that thing that I sent you about death metal English?
Yes, I didn't. Wait, I started reading it and then I was like, I want to give this a lot more attention.
Okay, it's a concept that I ran into in an album review. Introduced by a Swedish death metal band a while ago. That there's like a specific characteristic of death metal English where you'll be talking about like infinite indoctrination spiral or whatever. There's words that sound very death metal-y, and you know, the things that you would growl into a microphone.
This is because you said that, I'm just going to loop it back into, you remember how someone wrote a death metal song inspired by Time War?
I do.
That's a real thing that happened, and I am absolutely
I'd forgotten. How could I forget that?
What of me there is in you, I think is what it's called. But anyway, I will link it at some point and share it, and I'm sure you guys have means and ways. Anyway, it was very, very cool. But yeah, does that answer your question, Alexandra? Like, we did know that we wanted to do time travel. There was some element of that, but there are so many different kinds. We kind of wanted to figure out what felt best suited to the kind of story we wanted to tell. And we also knew we wanted it to be a love story. Like we figured that out, and knowing that
either a love story or a very deep friendship story. We were sort of, I remember there being some indeterminacy at the beginning.
Yeah. Once we had to figure that out. Like we went through, we went, like one of our, we had sort of two touchstones that we were thinking of. Like we were like, this is the vibe that we want. And one of them was Revolutionary Girl Lieutenant, and one of them was Steven Universe. And the reason was that, like, I introduced Max to Steven Universe when it was first coming out, which now feels so long ago. And as Max was watching it, he was like, oh, this is like referencing Revolutionary Girl Lieutenant, which I hadn't heard of or seen. And so we ended up watching that together. I highly recommend it. It's so good. If you haven't, anyway, it's amazing. But there is a lot of, there's just, a lot of sapphic longing, love, pining, torture stuff, going on. And we were both like, we dig this. We really want this. We want to do this. But there was like one of the things from Steven Universe that we really wanted, or that we like had been kind of became an important touchstone of our vocabulary, was fusion. And the fact that in Steven Universe, fusion is not a like necessarily romantic thing. We wanted to carve out space to be like, do we want to have this be just like a really passionate friendship, or do we want to bring it to romance? And we kind of decided, like, as we went back and forth on it, that we wanted it to be romance instead.
The the time travel aspect also was a bit of an expedient means, in a way that I sometimes feel I shouldn't be completely honest about. But knowing that we had limited time to work on this, and that every moment that we had, like, physically in the same space to write, was utterly valuable. I was at least looking for ways to keep the world building as abstract and schematic as possible, and to allow both of us maximum freedom to just do whatever came into our head, rather than, and have it work within this broad schematic outline, rather than having to go back and check with the other one of like whether this is consistent with something that happened in the year 72 BC or whatnot.
Yeah.
And the time war with this very big, deep time battlefield concept that we see only occasionally and never get the full view of, gave us a lot of that freedom.
Yeah, there was one point where, because you have to understand, this gazebo that we were writing in had no internet. So we just went, and we basically, whatever we had in our heads and our memories, and was what we had to work with. And
that's a good way to write, actually. Throws it back on your own resources. It
really does. And at one point I wanted to, now the area of my scholarship is the early 19th century in Britain. And there was a moment where I was like reaching outside of that comfort zone slightly, but still in a kind of historical framework in the London Next part, where I was making reference to currency. And I suddenly stopped and was second guessing myself, like, oh no, would they have paper currency at this point? Did they have that? Did they have a note for this particular, wait, is this going to ruin this line that I'm writing? I am very much the kind of writer who, I find it very hard to put placeholders. Like, I need to have figured out the thing in order to write it. And I was suddenly paralyzed, but I can't. And then I remembered that, but wait, it's infinite time and space. In this version of 19th century Britain, the currency that I want exists purely for my expedience in writing this absolute throwaway line that no one is going to care about. And if someone comes at me over it, I can say, well, perhaps in your reality, this is how currency is. But actually, I think you'll find, as a scholar of London Next. But anyway, so that was, but we had a lot more freedom as a consequence of doing it that way.
So Time War is a very character-heavy book, and I think sometimes when people think of fantasy, they imagine huge world-building elements, a very world magic the whole fantasy element. But we really love like how you guys explore the characters of Red and Blue, and even their names themselves. It's like Red and Blue rather than like Jane and Bob, you know.
Zorlax.
Reminded a lot of like
Zorlax and Steve.
In the club, we were just talking about like, oh my god, their little names for each other, like Blueberry, my little like raspberry, like things remind them of each other. So we wanted to just like ask you guys about how you came to crafting these two characters and why you decided to make it more like character focused rather than like world focused.
Sure. I'll say that where the names in particular are concerned, Max, a big part of maybe Max, maybe you don't think of this as a big part of our friendship. I think of it as a big part of my friendship that you have a lot more math and science education than I do. And so you are often, not often, but like foundationally to me, explaining scientific concepts that I am aware of but don't actually understand, and doing so in a really kind and non-judgmental way, which I often really deeply appreciate. So early on in our friendship, I said to Max, people keep talking about like red shifting in stories, and I don't know what it means. Like I just don't get it. And I keep trying to read the wiki and I get like, I'm not getting it. And so he like started hand drawing me diagrams and taking photos of them to like explain to me over a series of texts. And so red shift and blue shift, like the fact that red and blue are the respective ends of the spectrum of light. And so because we were writing something that was spy versus spy, and like in Mad Magazine and stuff like that, you know, that's like a black and white spy are fighting each other, like this heavy contrast. We're like, oh, it kind of makes sense that if there's a time war, that they could just name each other like based on the ends of like the spectrum of light, because then they're the farthest possible points from each other, but also kind of looping back towards each other and stuff like that. So
it depends. It can depend on your direction, right? If you're
if
you're running away from the same wavelength, it will look more red, and if you're running toward the same wavelength, the same wave, it will look more blue. So we have these extremely. I think that's right. It's been a minute, and I've had a 4-year-old, so like scrambled eggs. But it's been. We in our heads have a sense of colors as these strong human categories, right? Like here's blue. It's blue as a thing. Blue is a metaphysical true thing. But physically speaking, we have there are waves. The waves don't really care what blue is to a monkey. And the monkey's interpretation of the wave as blue or red or whatever depends a lot on how fast the monkey is going in what direction, which I think also plays into the way the characters start to slide through each other. I remember that conversation, Amal, as being rooted in, like, for me, in this frustration with stories you were telling about your history of science and maths education, which is really infuriating. Because
it was brief sidebar. When I was a child, I loved math. I loved it profoundly, and my dad taught me algebra that was, you know, ahead of where I was in school and stuff like that. And I really, really loved it. And then I got to like grade 7 and had a math teacher who was a man who explicitly said to us, is that beeping here? Oh, sorry. I apologize if that's the case. Anyway, there was this math teacher who explicitly said to a classroom full of children that boys were just naturally better at math and girls were naturally better at humanities and language. And this was scientifically proven. So the girls shouldn't feel too bad if they just weren't as good at math as the boys. And this was like, at the time, there was one student in this class who was studying math like 2 years ahead of where we were, and that student was a girl, but you know, whatever. This guy was terrible. Gosh, I this was like the early 90s, you know, this is now many decades ago. It still makes me furious when I think about it. Anyway, this man single-handedly squashed my love of math and made me feel like, well, I am actually really good at writing, so maybe I should just focus on that, especially since this terrible man, who's an extremely bad teacher, refuses to help me understand things. So I just wrote poetry in math class for like the next 3 years until
That'll show him.
yeah, that'll show him.
Shove these combs down your throat.
Yeah. Until I had a teacher who was like, "You're failing math. You will like flunk out of this program you are in unless you do better." That teacher was a lady. These are incidental, I'm sure, but anyway, I just feel like there is a kind of lost part of me that like was taken away, which I appreciate very deeply. Like that Max could be like, well, I will help, and you know, math is cool, and in fact, math is extremely cool, especially when you have someone talking about it really passionately and like wanting to like share an interest and stuff.
My position is I know minuscule amounts, but what I do know I'm really into.
This is the thing that is said by a person who has studied enough to know how much math there is. So, but anyway. Sorry, I know we're taking like 10 minutes to answer each question.
Oh, no. We love it. We actually love it. I could just like sit here and listen to you guys. But well, the story that you shared about like the horrible like math teacher is like actually a great segue for our next question, which is like, what inspired the decision to place womanhood at the forefront of the narrative for Time War, particularly evident in the portrayal of like the two female spies, because it's like they are the center and they're both women. And one thing that really stood out to me when I was reading was I distinctly remember there was one line where Red referred to God as her, and I was like, oh my goodness, I have to ask this, like, what is this like intentional decision to like and I don't know, I want to say empower women, but that was like my interpretation of it.
Sure. I mean, we did actually talk about this. Like this was another like kind of really considered decision that we made, and a big part of it was that we wanted these two characters who were going to be, you know, on opposite sides of a war between two powers that are like opposite but equal and stuff like that. We really wanted them to be equivalent to each other. And we wanted the dynamic between them to be one of like, you are the same as me, like you are, like we have more in common with each other than we do with the sides that we are from. And it is really hard to imagine writing that kind of same power level, you know, same but different power level, when there's like a dynamic between like just like a cis man and a cis woman, which again, these are also very weird concepts to have when you have like the ability to shapeshift at will and stuff.
Yeah, like on the one hand, you're talking about post-human cyborg, like nanosphere god people in the year 1.5 million, right? But the story is being read here in the 20 whatevers by people who have our existing ranges of gender categories and experiences with being male and female or non-binary, or like the experiences with the field of gender and sexuality. So we definitely wanted characters who were like seeing each other almost on other sides of a mirror in that way.
Yeah, and very much too wanted, you know, knowing that these are characters who are writing to each other across vast distance, you know, the existence of she and her on the page to each other, like was the thing that we wanted. Like we want that, given the infinity, like we sometimes tried to game it out and going, how will people receive this? You know, what will people say about it or whatever? And most, like, I remember thinking that, you know, if someone is like, why does female still exist in like the far future, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, well, you know, let's imagine a far future, blah, 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 where everyone can be anything at any point. Why not also still have she, her exist as pronouns and still have people identify as female, like in addition to being able to transform their bodies and stuff like that. Like there are very, like there's one character who is like, so abstracted from embodiment that she can be, you know, a cyborg and can be like a kind of consciousness floating through a distributed cloud and stuff like that. And there's another character who's so embedded in like organic matter and experience that sex and gender like makes about, like, do you know how many genders mushrooms have? Like literally thousands of I shouldn't say gender, of sexual, like literally of like pairings of chromosomes and stuff like that. They are vast numbers. So it's like getting away from the bipedal monkey, you know, dimorphic sexuality thing was interesting to us. But at the same time, we just wanted to have what felt to a reader like two women talking to each other. And to have like, you know, that, like, especially because the touchstones we were coming from creatively, it felt so refreshing always to have like women talking to each other and figuring things out together and changing and transforming each other. I'm reaching back in time because we wrote this in 2016. It was like fully 7 years ago. So I'm trying to reach back to some of the other conversations we had about this. But yeah, that was mostly it, honestly. Oh, but the God, that's it. God being her. There was a period of time. I remember the first time I encountered this was in the late 90s. I was reading a game book for Vampire the Masquerade. And I noticed that, I think it was in Vampire the Masquerade, whenever the narration, I guess, of the book, whenever like referred to a generic person, they used she. So whenever they talked about a vampire character, your vampire, blah, 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 may do this, she would do this. And it blew my tiny mind as like a girl growing up in the 90s that like it really affected me. And I know that like sort of discourse politically and stuff like that, those like attitudes around that have changed. We opt much more for singular they and stuff like that, which is all well and good, but it like hit me at the time. I was like, my gosh, what if like the default pronoun was she? What would it, this was many years before like Unlucky's, which I actually sadly haven't read still, don't tell her. Anyway, what is the first book of the
Ancillary Justice?
Ancillary Justice, thank you.
Yeah, that kind of thing was going around, not necessarily in the world building aspects, but a lot of 90s role playing rules were starting to get this feeling of like, the abstract player, who's that supposed to be, or who's the abstract GM? And at that point, I think this is still pretty much a habit. There'd be a little box in the front saying, we're going to use this following convention. The GM's just always going to be she in this book or something like that.
And I think there's a corrective instinct, right? Like, because role-playing games, like whether or not this was true, the received impression of them was of a very like boy-oriented thing. It was like there are all the stereotypes about being like which I lived, of being like the only girl in a gaming group and that making weird dynamics happen and stuff. And so there's a kind of, what if we flip that on its head? Like there's a script flipping instinct, a corrective instinct. Sorry, I've interrupted you. Please continue, Max.
No. I mean, interrupt all you want. It's there is this sort of corrective and script flipping instinct there, which I think is also sort of worked through in Time War to a certain extent. I think there's also this feeling of like, I can only imagine that the people out there running like good, profoundly welcoming comics shops, like are really angry about the sort of bad, very not welcoming, off-putting comic shops, because like it means that people are less likely to come into your shop or are going to think that it's, like there's people being excluded. And there's also this, I think this thing that I love has a feeling that I think this thing that I love has nothing to do with this exclusionary nonsense that some people in the community are trying to push. Like,
Mhm.
so let's try to fight back on that as much as we possibly can. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure where I first encountered using she pronouns for God. Definitely in the 90s. It might have been some extremely like div school kid theology reading, but it could just as easily have been like Alanis Morissette and Dogma, you know, like
Yes. Yeah.
this was something that was in the water a lot when I was growing up, and that I found generative and cool and a good way to think about it.
I am actually like pagan, so that is also like the divine feminine and stuff like that is something that I am very au fait with. So that didn't actually, that weirdly, you saying like God as her did not have the same like surprising effect to me that like a female GM or like abstract female thing did. You know,
Princess Demiurge strikes again.
It's so strange. It's like, it's so funny to have been, I've been pagan since I started listening to Lorena McKennitt and like when I was 14, but weirdly like seeing this in a book, GMs can be girls, like that was
GM in what's it, not Darkest Dungeon, that awful chick tract about how Dungeon Masters, how Dungeons and Dragons is going to turn you into an evil Satanist and so forth, is a like very gothed out Elvira-y woman.
Wow.
So there you go. I
mean,
the vibes, you can tell. But you know, so yes, there's that, and I think there was also a bit of, you know, we've mentioned Steven Universe before, and I think I found myself compelled by the things that show does with gender, in that the gems in Steven Universe, which I think I trailed off sometime around the Human Zoo episode, not from any kind of passionate disagreement with the show. It's just like life got in the way, and I've never had time to sort of circle back around with it. But I loved how the gems were marked as female, as like women in terms of Earth gender, but they're all holographic emanations of sentient crystalline matrices, right? Like there's no, as far as I could tell, there's no like underlying biological gender outside of what these crystals are doing to and around one another and the way that the light's playing through them. The emanations have a gendered vibe to them from an Earther's perspective, but you know, there doesn't seem to be or at least until up to the point where I stopped watching, they hadn't introduced the notion of like there being a male gem out there, right? Mm-hmm. Steven. So I thought that was really interesting. Like it was an interesting way to play it, and get a vibe of a society or a social context that had a very different take on gender, but also didn't intersect with our often very blinkered and limited categories of masculine performance.
Yeah.
There's something of that going on too, for me at least.
Yeah.
So obviously, like as our book club, we read this, we're going to dive into like one spoilery-ish question, but the ending of the story was obviously very emotional and intense. And I remember after I finished, I like immediately FaceTimed Alexandra and I was like, wait, what just happened? I need to confirm. I don't know if I got it what I was supposed to be getting. But did you guys always have this ending in mind? And how did you guys like let this come to be? Like, how did you know you wanted to conclude the story?
Oh, so I mean, what you need to understand is that when there was one point at which we sketched out like a 5-act structure for this, and the 5 acts, like it looked like squiggles that intersected at a point and then kind of like trailed off, but then also like there was a lot of squiggles is what I'm saying. So we had like big beats that we knew were going to happen. We knew that there was going to be an initial like, you know, thrown glove of like, haha, what I dare you to correspond with me. And then there was going to be a letter writing phase. And then there was going to be a commitment to sincerity. And then there was going to be endangering each other with this secret correspondence where they're actually in love. And then there was going to be, wait, we can't write to each other anymore. And then, and then there was going to be like, I will die to protect you from your side finding out about this, right? So, and then there had to be some kind of, but we have to save whoever died. We weren't sure which of them was going to like do the sacrifice part. So we kind of went back, and I don't know if we went back and forth. I think I might have been like, I think this one will, but either way, like we knew from the beginning though that the thing that is propelling a lot of the action is actually Red following herself in time. So we knew that Seeker was Red. And so knowing that the thing that starts to make them feel like they're being surveilled is actually Red trying to catch all of the bits of their letters to make herself more Blue so that she can access Blue's time and kind of inoculate her against the poison that she is giving her to kill her so that she will actually survive it. Like that's the kind of closed loop part. So the thing that happens at the end is that, you know, Red feels like, okay, there's this tiny chance I might be going insane, but I feel like Blue has left me these like traces of how I could bring her, make it so that she doesn't actually die from this thing. And it's gonna be real hard. And she does all this stuff and has no idea whether or not it has worked until the very end, where it has worked. Blue is like, they've never met, right? So it's like Blue is like in form of this jailer person, and then and then they manage to get out. So that's the end. Or when we don't, we like, you know, we assume that Red having proven herself like, immensely capable of busting out of a prison and stuff. Yeah. Does that clarify it?
The power of like any kind of ambiguity there in the ending is it just allows the reader to be certain, rather than the book having to tell you necessarily what happens. Like you get to the point and you just know. Well, that's a wonderful magic trick when it pulls off. Like the ending of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is theoretically ambiguous. Anything could happen.
True.
But you know.
You pretty much know.
You know.
Yeah. But one other thing I'll say about it is we, in terms of like, we did have a really hard time solving a problem of like exactly how the death, like how we were going to write that part. Like we knew what we wanted to have happen, but we have this rhythm of like letter, receiving letter. And then once we were interrupting that rhythm, we were like, but how do we write this part? And we ended, like, there was the gazebo that was harboring us. We ended up like lying on the floor of it and staring at the ceiling like for a while, just going, but how? And then we kept thinking we'd solved it, and then would realize like we hadn't. There was a lot of back and forth. Now when I read it, I'm like, of course, it's inevitable. And yet when I remember the back and forth of like, but what has to happen when, so that we know that this, so that this, and which one of us is writing what. And
that was one of the moments where it really felt, where like our different takes really felt additive. I mean, all of it felt additive, but like in that particular moment, I think we were both denying each other the ability to hand wave out in customary fashion. Or sort of usual bags of tricks. Like, no, that wouldn't really work because this, or it doesn't work for me because that. So we ended up pushing until the result is very clear, inevitable. Like, I don't see why there would ever be a problem coming to this conclusion. Well, because we took it into the woodshed for a real long time.
Yeah.
But the ending is so good. I remember when I was reading it and I had realized that Red was the seeker, I was like, oh, this is genius.
Hooray!
What is going on? I cannot believe, and then it's over. But yeah, thank you for sharing all that. We have some fun and final questions. And so first, the fun question is, if you could travel to any place in time, where / location and time would you want to go?
Ooh, gosh. I think I answer this question differently every time I encounter a variation of it. So I don't know, Max, you go first. I have to think.
Yes.
I went first with the book, so you have to go first.
You did. I don't have a good answer for this one at all. I honestly don't. The potential is staggering.
Sometimes I like to think of this question as like, who would I like to meet or have a conversation with? And then when we have like the potential to like change stuff, then that's a whole other thing too.
That's true. Yeah, like the languages is an issue. Like, I'm fundamentally limited by what I can speak. If that's,
Yeah.
Let's say
okay, I've got. This is entirely on pure curiosity. We don't really know what the Roman sauce spice mix garum tasted like. There are existing recipes, but they're all of the form of like, do this thing, like put some fish in a pit for a while, and I think very recently there's a guy who claims to have done it, or a team that claimed to have done it, basically off of RNA archaeology and other goofiness. But we don't know what garum tasted like. We don't know what the dormice preparation was that the ancient Romans were so into that one of the emperors made it illegal to consume dormice in Rome because they were creating what we'd now recognize as a trade imbalance with like some random chunk of, I think, southern Hungary, where all of these particular dormice came from. So I don't know. I'd like to know what garum tasted like. I'd maybe like to nibble on a dormouse, prepared in the traditional fashion, and then come home to my air conditioning and my good dentistry and my partner that I love very much and my child and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, I think I like this approach of like I want to taste the food that we don't know what it tasted like. I feel very, very drawn to like ancient Syria from a place of like my family is from Lebanon and Syria, and but my knowledge of that lineage and background is one of civil war and violence and fleeing it and injustice and colonialism and imperialism. And part of me really just wants to like see an unbroken Damascus, so but I feel like I also am not sufficiently versed in the history to know, because obviously wars have been happening forever. It's not like they're not a new invention, but they're we sure know what war tastes like, at least some recent preparations, but this is the other thing. I think part of the difficulty of like the desire to look back is, and I think it's a mistaken desire, but it's very, very seductive, is to look back and find something unbroken and find something that was in some way better than what we have. But I think that's a trap. Nevertheless, the desire to see certain structures, or like certain places, or a certain way of life that
what did the Alexandrian Colossus really look like?
Yeah, or just to see like all the statues that we know as like just gleaming white marble because they've been stripped of all the color that was on them, like to see them as they were just painted. I feel like it's less a desire for something to have been perfect or better and more a kind of like restorative desire to be like, what is the thing that we are missing? Like, what is the thing that we can't taste? What is the thing that we could add to our picture of stuff? And I guess from that point of view, like, yeah, I would like to see what Damascus was like, before the Ottomans even, like that sort of thing. But I'd also quite like to go to, see nature in different places before it got mucked around. So there's like a concept that Ursula Le Guin has in like her first book in Ricannon's World, where it's someone like wears something called an imperma suit, and I'm sort of assuming I would have like an imperma suit that could just protect me from the claws of wild animals or the like inimical elements and stuff. So I could just be like, wow, look at this coral reef that's still in it, and stuff like that. But yeah, that is a non-answer, and I am committing to it over and over. But thank you.
We support it.
We support it. So we're also really curious to know what we can expect from you guys in the future in terms of future works, individually, collaboratively. What can fans of yours anticipate?
Well, Max has several books coming out soon, which I'll let you talk about first.
Oh. You start speaking, and then you're like, and then I will then over the bus Max goes. All right, no, so I have right now the big thing that I'm working on is the conclusion of my long-running fantasy series, The Craft Sequence, with this trilogy, I think, technically, we'll see, called the Craft Wars. And the first book in this came out earlier this year called Dead Country, and the second book, Wicked Problems, will be out next year, and I'm writing the third one right now. And I also have a short story and so does Amal in the Dangerous Vision. No, not Dangerous Vision.
Not that one. It's from a certain point of view.
From a certain point of view. There we go. Gosh. Of course. From a certain point of view, Star Wars anthology on Return of the Jedi, which I'm very excited.
Yes. We each have stories in that. I have a short story coming out in a book that'll be out on August 1st called The Book of Witches. And it's also an anthology of stories about witches. So I've got a story in that called John Hollowback and the Witch.
Great story.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very excited about it. I can't believe it's like August is literally next week. So
no, it's not. Just believe the illusion.
But I'm very, very excited because I recently just got a 4-book deal with Tor. So the first of that is going to be a novella that might come out next year. I think it's supposed to. Anyway, it's a title is sort of TBD at the moment, but it's a retelling of a ballad that I really love. I mentioned Lorena McKenna at the beginning of this, but there's a folk song called The Bonny Swans or The Cruel Sister, or it's like a traditional folk song pattern thing where you've got some jerk is courting 2 sisters and he prefers the younger one and the older one is jealous and she like kills her sister. This makes no sense. I've had like beef with this ballad for my whole life because I have a sister and I love her very much. I'm the eldest of 4 and like the idea is ridiculous to me. So I was like, must write fix it fic for this ballad, I guess. And I did. And so that will come out sometime next year. Might be called Harp Swan Sister, might be called something else. Magic is grammar. So there's that. There's also, I don't know, Max, can we say this?
I don't think so.
I don't think we can? Okay, well, there are secrets. There are secrets. We
That
have
is a
revealed
hint in
many
itself, and I'll
secrets.
take it.
Yeah, that was an ounce of a secret, and I will devour that.
Yes, there might be secrets revealed at some point soon, but we can't talk about it yet.
Okay, that's fair. That's fine. Thank you for sharing. We're super excited to read all of your future books and keep an eye out for whatever the secret is. Final question is, what do you hope for readers to get out of your stories? And do you have any last messages for your readers and the book club and just everyone in general?
Gosh, before Time War came out, I would have been thrilled for it to just make like one person who wasn't Max and me happy. Like just to know that like one person might read this, someone like there's this Samuel Taylor Coleridge quote that I come back to a lot. It's just something that he wrote in his like private notebooks. And it's he basically says, why make a book? Because my arms only go out this far. And a book can reach much farther beyond that, basically. And so just the idea that like it could reach one person, make one person happy, make one person feel seen or moved, like that would have been enough. So the fact that it has reached as many people as it has, and the fact that in the year it came out, people started telling us that they were like falling in love with their best friends and using it in their wedding vows and stuff like that. Like, I'm gonna get a little weepy just talking about it.
Yeah,
so that has been incredible, and it's so far beyond what we could have ever expected. Like, who sits around going, I really hope someone uses my book in their wedding vows. Like, it was just completely unexpected and so beautiful, and everything with Dickolas stuff has been like absolutely
joyful, abundant.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think if there is one like specific thing that I hope people take from it, it is that like there is always something, we are always inventing and rediscovering the past. And that, and by that logic, like things that we always sort of think of as new or invented by us have been here a lot longer than we acknowledge a lot of the time. And that's as true for like queerness as it is for lots of other things. So that's my answer anyway. How about you, Max?
The only thing I can add to that is that that's also true of the future. These visions of futures that have to be a certain way are, I think, always parasitic on the now. And anyone who's telling us that there's only one particular way that things can go, or like that this is there is no alternative, like it's a work of storytelling and a work of violence. And there are always other paths to discover and to create and build for ourselves. And those don't need to be, the work of creating those paths doesn't need to be the work of overturning an entire world, though sometimes it is. It can be as simple as finding one other person and walking forward with them. And it can also be much more than that.
Oh, well, thank you guys again so much for being here with us. We loved your book. I am ready to reread it for another time and another time and another time every year. And so many people in our book club has also loved your book. We're so I think the power of the fandom from the metal rock song.
I'm trying to find it actually. I will see if I can pull it up. But yeah.
It was how many people your stories have touched. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for joining us. And we're very excited for all your future works and this upcoming secret that we're going to be stalking your social media.
Watch the skies.
Yep.
But thank you so much. And thank you everyone who's tuning in and watching us. We're excited for our August book announcements that are going to be coming soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so